Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Ron Carucci. I'll tell you all about Ron in just a moment. Those of you who have watched the show before know that Grace Under Pressure focuses on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, which is really the hard stuff, as Tom Peters reminds us. It's the caring, the generosity, the kindness we exert toward others. And when you do it as a leader, as you will discover how much Ron is, you do it with the spirit of generosity to bring people together and catalyze the organization with your energy. Ron, it's such a pleasure to have you on Grace Under Pressure again. Welcome.
John, thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be with you, my friend. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Great. I want to read directly from your book, which is called To Be Honest, because the bio is neat and concise. And so anyway, Ron Carucci has a 30-year track record. I think he started when he was 10, working with CEOs and executives, tackle big problems, strategy, organization, culture, that kind of stuff. He serves on the advisory board of NYU's Ethical Systems, and has previously served as associate professor of organizational behavior at Fordham. Ron has consulted for a company, think of one, and he's consulted for them. He's a TEDx speaker. He is internationally recognized. He's published a bunch of books, and he's a good, open-hearted, generous, kind man. And it's an honor to have him on the show. Welcome, Ron.
John, you're so generous. It's always good to be with a fellow Paisan.
You got it. Anyway, yes, that's true. You have an interesting statement, and it said, in our news cycles, politically or the private sector, whatever, media, society at large, there's a growing fatigue with dishonesty. People are longing for someone to tell them the truth. Boy, ain't that the truth. So, and you've done something about it. You have been studying honesty and researching it since 2003. What's behind this study, Ron?
Well, so we had 15 years of diagnostic data with over 3,200 leaders. What I wanted to understand, John, was, as a very seasoned, veteran practitioner like yourself, we're all tired of, it was the culture, or it was a few bad apples. The explanations for stories like Wells Fargo and Theranos and, pick one, right? They're just disheartening. And the career and family and marketplace carnage behind them is immeasurable. I wanted to know, could we do better? Isn't it possible that maybe there's more to the story than we're finding? And if there was, could we predict under what conditions people would tell the truth and behave fairly and serve a greater good, and under what conditions they would lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first? And if we could predict it, could we prevent it? And the good news was, after some really sharp digging and some great analytical tools like the help of IBM Watson, we found out that, in fact, you can predict it and you can create the conditions that get you the behavior you want.
Great. Well, you do something very interesting that I haven't seen done before. You say that truth, justice, and purpose are three sides of the same coin. I've written a lot about purpose. I haven't ever seen it linked. So tell me how you came to that conclusion, Ron.
From 2 points of view. One was from the research data itself, where when we sort of analyzed what people were saying about the organizations they worked for, saying the right thing, doing the right thing, and saying and doing the right thing for the right reason were all very intimately linked. Truth, justice, and purpose. But the neuroscience data tells us the same thing. The parts of our brain that regulate our own sensitivity to dishonesty or deceit are the same parts of our brain that regulate our sense of purpose, our sense of well-being, our sense of connection in the world, or our sense of isolation, self-interest, and fear. So neuroscientifically and sociologically, it's no longer enough to be not a liar to be labeled honest. It's no longer just enough to say, I'm a good guy, I'm a good woman. Now the bar's gone up because our experience of honesty has gone into a free fall. People want more, and now you have to say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reason to get the label of honesty placed on you.
That's great. Now, you talked about culture. So there's a story, and I think it was something that Marshall might have said, but he was keynoting for this company, and the CEO got up and spoke in platitudinous terms. And as it turns out, this CEO was actually the son of a Baptist minister, so he knew how to get everybody on board. And I think Marshall is exaggerating. He said, "I think I was crying," and it turned out that company was Enron. So talk about falsity. And culture does lead people to be dishonest, does it not, Ron? So
what we now know is that it can. We now know that the things that shape behavior in organizations can create behavior you don't want. And here's a simple example. So we all have values. We all have cultural promises, statements, things we say about our companies. It turns out that if you don't live by those, it turns out that if your actions and words don't match, you now raise the risk by a factor of 3. That you are more likely to have people lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first. Because what you've done is institutionalized duplicity. You've said, around here, we say one thing and we do another. And so what you've told people is you now have permission to do the same. When it comes to our values, we're hypocrites. So when it comes to anything else you want to do, be a hypocrite as well. You've made it okay for people to put their own interests above the company's.
Okay. Now, is not the opposite true? I remember a truism or something that a famous football coach said, that he tried to work in a culture where it was uncool or not acceptable to cheat. Is that possible, Ron? So
it's funny. I talked, one of the greatest interviews in the book I did with our mutual friend, Bernard Banks, who was the head of leadership development at West Point. And he talks about time under the code, right? We all know the famous cadet code is, I will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate others that do. It turns out honesty can be taught, and in fact, it has to be. Honesty, what we learned, John, is not a character trait. It's actually a muscle. It's actually a capability that if you want to be good at it, you have to work at it, and you have to work at it every day. The great news about our brains is that we're naturally hardwired for honesty. We're at our best selves, our most healthiest, psychologically, emotionally, and physically, and our best performance when we're the most honest. The unfortunate thing is that in an environment that values something else, we succumb. So we'll naturally adapt.
I love that idea of honesty as a muscle. You have to practice it. And as you were talking about, we are as our best selves when we're honest. The quote from Mark Twain said something, I'm paraphrasing, honesty is always tell the truth because it's the easiest way to get through life or whatever. You don't have to remember things.
Yeah, you have to remember how much you lied. And have to remember who you told what to.
Yeah, that can be. So anyway, what is it when we talked about values, and that's the currency that a lot of folks talk about in our world. So how do leaders embody the values? What does it mean to walk the talk? And from your perspective, Ron?
Well, the first thing I think you have to realize is that you are walking the talk. You just have to know. But most leaders, I'm sure you probably find this true with your clients too. They don't know what talk they're walking. They may espouse a certain value. They may say, I value compassion, I value patience, I value productivity. But if I followed you around with a video camera all day long and had it on mute, and I showed that video, could I use it to train people on that value? And that's the question you have to ask yourself. Well, what cues am I sending? I had to give feedback to a leader, maybe 6 months ago or so, and tell him that his team didn't trust him. And he was incensed and defensive, and he said, well, I've never lied to them. I'm inclusive of them. I'm transparent. They know where I stand. How could that be untrustworthy? I said, well, apparently during meetings, you can get pretty short with people. You can get pretty curt when you don't like what somebody says. You're dismissive, and sometimes you use sarcasm to do it. He goes, well, everybody has a bad day. I said, well, you have more than your fair share of them. He said, well, how is that not trustworthy? I said, you've made it unsafe for people to tell you what they think. You've made their own mistakes feel like weaponry to you, even with your mockery and even with your sense of dismissal when they go on too long when you're impatient. Your impatience and your shortness makes you not safe, and that makes you not trustworthy. Whether you need to be or not, it's irrelevant.
Well, you just hit on something that, and it's very appropriate because you quote her and she endorsed your book, and that's Amy Edmondson. If you want a blueprint for creating an organization where people will freely tell you the truth, treat each other fairly, and serve your mission with purpose, it's this book. And Amy's the godmother of this because she created psychological safety. So as you write, psychological safety and honesty are part and parcel of the same thing. Am I correct? So,
in each of the statistical factors, apologize for the noise, John. Somewhere between 3 and 6% of every factor we analyzed had to do with the presence or the absence of psychological safety. So, in every factor we found, and we found 4 that predict whether or not people will tell the truth or be honest or not. Whether or not psychological safety was present was either a multiplier of good behavior or its absence was a multiplier of bad behavior.
Okay. And what are those factors that shape honest behavior, Ron?
So the first one was clear identity. Be who you say you are. So your organization has things it says about itself. Be who you say you are. When you are 3 times more likely to have people be honest. The second one was accountability. So when your accountability practices are seen as fair and just and with dignity, meaning the way my contributions are treated is with dignity, and I feel like I have a fair shot at being successful as anybody else, you're 4 times more likely to have people be honest. When governance is transparent, meaning when I walk into a room and there's a meeting, I can believe what's being said around the table, and I can feel like my voice is welcome to dissent or disagree. You're 3.5 times more likely to have people tell the truth and be honest. And lastly, cross-functional collaboration. This was a surprising one to us. When the themes of your organization are stitched, when there's cohesion with the places where there are usual border wars, sales and marketing, supply chain and operations, all the places where we typically have unresolved frictions. If those themes are stitched, you're 6 times more likely to have people be honest, because now you don't have dueling truths anymore. You have a unified story. When you have fragmentation and silos and border wars, now you have dueling truths. So the goal isn't longer to find one truth, it's to make sure you understand that my truth is right and yours is wrong. And so you deteriorate and erode cohesion. So, and the most fascinating part of a statistical model, John, was that they're cumulative. So if you're good at all 4 of those things, you are 16 times more likely to have people behave honestly. But if you suck at all 4 of them, you're 16 times more likely to find yourself in a headline of a New York Times story you didn't want to be in.
I love that. Yeah. Ron, you're getting the beauty of this book, to be honest, is that it takes a very, very soft subject, which isn't soft at all, but perceived to be, and you did the rigor and the research. And so you were quoting statistics to me, 4 times this, 16 times that, whatever. But while this book is research-based, there are a lot of hero stories in here. People who've wrestled with moral dilemma and faced it and come out with truth. And so you can ignore the research, not that one would, but you can just read for the stories. And I think that makes, to be honest, a compelling book. So I applaud it. Is there a story in here that jumps out at you that when people say, what's a story that comes to mind for you?
Gosh, I mean, the best part of the book, John, was that I got to meet so many compelling heroes and witness such incredible leadership and organizational work. But I'll pick one that's a mutual friend of ours. He was a feature interview of the book, and he's in my TV series, Moments of Truth, is Aubert Joly, and his leadership of Best Buy. I think if I think about a compelling story of purpose, a compelling story of what it means to invite a population of people who are pretty demoralized and on the brink of disaster, right, to live a greater purpose by asking them, when are they at their best? It's Aubert's story. His work to fingerprint that organization and to invite, and talk about a pretty intensified mayhem, environment, retail. Electronics. I mean, it's a cutthroat, low margin, eating away by Amazon kind of business. And everybody told me he's crazy for taking on that job.
Right.
He countervailed all prevailing advice, didn't cut costs, didn't cut closed doors, didn't do all the things that he was told to do. Instead, he woke up the soul of the company. He rescued what was imprisoned in a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense, and unleashed and liberated what he calls human magic, and let loose the passions and purpose of an entire population of a company. And he did it with very intentional and thoughtful ways, by making sure people had a chance to embrace and mark the purpose of the company with their own purpose.
You make it safe for people to act the right way, what's in their nature, and they want to do it. And when they see the person at the top doing it, it cascades down. And so that is a very powerful story. And the other thing I like about your book, and I keep referring to it, is it's very practical. In every chapter, there are some key summaries, which for idiots like me is a good reminder, but also some real hard action steps. This is what you can do with your team, with your direct reports, confronting issues, getting to the root of the matter. So you make it accessible for people to embrace honesty, which is, without honesty, you can't be a leader, certainly. So
well, these days, trustworthiness is harder to find, right? I mean, no leader would say, "I don't care if I'm trusted or not." But too many leaders assume they're trusted just because they are the leader. Great. And these days, that's the reason you aren't trusted.
There's another concept that I like in your book, and it's too often ignored. It's a word that you and I probably grew up with because I think we both have a Jesuit background, but it's the idea of dignity. And so how does dignity reinforce honesty?
Today, John, you never hear anybody say, "I'm so excited. It's my performance review today." Right? Nobody walks into work or to their quarterly review with their boss or their monthly whatever check-in and feels excited about talking about their own work with someone in authority, which is terrible, right? Yeah. The process of accountability should be the most dignifying, edifying, honoring experience of any employee's work. Today feels like the most demeaning and dishonoring. The problem is as our work has shifted over the last 20 years, where my remit is no longer how many T-shirts did I print or how many claims did I process. My remit now is a reflection of me. It's my analysis, my ideas, my creativity, my solutions, my perspective. You now can no longer say, "I'm not evaluating you, I'm evaluating your work," because my work is a part of me. The contribution and the contributor are more fused than ever. If I don't talk to you in a way that's dignifying, or if I don't talk about your work in a way that's dignifying, by default, it's insulting. One of the questions I love asking audiences when I speak, John, is how many of you have ever received a compliment from your boss that you found offensive? More than half the hands in the room go up. And we all know why. So if you don't honor the work and dignify the work of people as if it's a privilege that you got to experience their contribution and learn how and when they fell short, you dignify them with feedback to help them get better.
Right. And what is a key concept also to telling the truth, and as part of it is the hard truth. And we can't reach the truth. You had raised earlier the idea of opposing truth, your truth, my truth, and we need to come to one truth here. But that is the role of dissent. And I always think dissent is important for any healthy culture. What's your perspective on dissent in an organization, Ron?
Here's what I tell leaders in real simple terms, John. If you don't have somebody coming into your office at least once or twice a week telling you something that makes you uncomfortable to hear, you can be very confident your leadership sucks. It's really that simple. Because you're telling somebody, and if your conclusion was there isn't anything to tell me, then you're not only a sucky leader, but you're stupid. Because no organization of any meaningful complexity doesn't have something going wrong. You are the topic of conversation at dinner, at night, in the homes of your team. Do you know what stories they're telling about you? And if you don't, you should get in on the conversation. So if you are not actively inviting different points of view, one leader I work with, she simply says to her team, "Okay, so tell me where I'm smoking crack." She asked for the pushback. Another CEO that I worked with for years, brilliant CEO, who would say, "Bring in the dueling fact bases." So if he knew someone on the agenda was going to be presenting XYZ, he'd say, okay, you guys come prepared to debate ABC. Because he knows people will make the data say whatever they wanted to say, right? So he'd rather have it done in front of him than underground.
Right.
You are missing really important information, because if everybody in the room is agreeing with you, you should be worried.
Right.
And so if you don't have any room for your ideas to get better by the opposing views of others, then you should be concerned.
You mentioned a topic that it's frequently referred to, and it's something I think I've basically written a book about it and alluded to another thing, and that's storytelling. And you have a chapter toward the end about if I remember correctly, telling your own story. What's the point of that, Ron? Why do you challenge people to do that? So
a couple of places where I bring people to story work. One is knowing your honesty story, because we all have a story of honesty, and you can't confront your own dishonesty until you know what brings you to it in the first place. How many studies do we need to know where the University of Massachusetts, for example, says we all lie on average twice a day? So, not new.
Yeah.
But the reality is, what I want leaders to understand is why. Why are you disrespectful to the clerk in the store? Why are you short with your kids? Why, when you behave beneath what you say you value, do you do so? Because if I asked you to examine in the last 10 days, 5 or 8 moments that you're not proud of, that brought you to some breach of your own code, you'd see a pattern. You'd see a set of conditions, people, contexts, and you'd see that your dishonesty is learned behavior. Right? It's not. Most people don't start out looking for some reason to be malicious. Usually, it's self-directed, right? It's usually some reason. I believe this behavior will mean if I'm curt or short with the Starbucks barista, or if I'm lose my temper, or if I'm demanding and dogmatic. I believe that behavior is meeting some need. Now, it actually isn't, but I've learned that behavior. You can't unlearn that dishonest behavior until you learn how you learned it in the first place. All of us have formative stories that bring us to who we are today. And unless you know your story, you can't shape your future.
That's great. How important is listening to people who are different from yourself to honesty, Ron?
It's critical. So in the last factor I mentioned before about the border wars, everybody in a company has a they.
Oh yeah.
Here they come, or they want this again. Well, my question is always, how could your they become part of your we? And what would happen to both of you if you did? And by the way, whose they are you? Who rolls their eyes when you call? Who goes the other way when they see you coming down the hall? We all have fragmented points of view. We all have our own echo chambers. We all want to surround ourselves with people who think like us. Tribalism is a natural instinct of human behavior. We're tribal toward our teams. We're tribal toward our communities. We're tribal toward our religious or political affiliations. Tribalism is a natural byproduct of scaling lots of people in a company. The problem is when those factions stay in place, you dilute the truth, and everybody becomes part of a much smaller story. So in order to unify an organization, make it part of a bigger story where we can share a truth, we have to cross those borders. You have to start by deciding and being honest about who is your they. Whose points of view do you bristle at in meetings? Who do you see as a nemesis? Whose motives are you constantly questioning, whether you have data to do so or not? Get up from your desk, get up from your virtual reality, get on a coffee call and say, hey, listen, it's no secret that you and I don't always see eye to eye, but how can I be a better colleague to you? Or what would happen if the two of us had a better relationship? How would our teams interact differently with each other? What would happen to the value we both create for the organization if you and I were a little bit more aligned? And just reach across a border, reach across a bridge to one of your theys and start the process of making them part of your we.
That's wonderful. I think you beat me to the punch because I was going to ask you for techniques and tips, and you just gave me one. And I think it's so important. And it's a 2-step process there. And it's one is that it takes guts if you and I are disagreeing, I'm going to call you, hey, Ron, I know I'm your they. How can we find a common ground? Because quote, I might hate your guts. Or I might not like the way you manage, but I got to work with you. And so it's not about me. So that takes guts there. But also, how about you giving me some direct feedback I got to listen. Is that not true, Ron?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have to agree, but I have to listen. Right. And aren't both of those acts, the courage to reach out and the courage to hear, both quintessential acts of grace, right? You opened up earlier by saying it's really the hard stuff. Well, I've never given that advice to a leader who said, "Oh, that's easy." They'll take the hard feedback from me, but to go build a bridge, to be vulnerable, to sort of take a risk and own the fact that if this relationship is messed up, I help.
Right.
Even if I think you did it all, I have to be honest that I helped. That's the ultimate in an act of grace.
Great. And there's another thing that is a theme that we haven't addressed, but it's in your book, and that's justice, social justice. So what role does honesty play in the DEI equation, if we will, diversity, equity, inclusion? So,
well, I think if there was one singular moral dilemma of the day, it's equity. And people are tired of feeling like the system is rigged. People are tired of feeling like no matter who they are, they show up as they don't have the same chances as anybody else. I ask my clients all the time, what roles in your company are privileged? And they're like, well, we have meritocracy here. It's a level playing field. I'm like, really? You're a tech company. You have engineers? If I watched how your resources were allocated in your budget, if I watched who got the hiring vacancies, would I not see some group of people? In a high growth company, it's salespeople. In a brand company, it's marketing people. In a tech company, it's engineers. We just be honest about it. But if those privileges, and it's not bad that we acknowledge that all work is not created equal, because all work is not equal. But if the playing field of success is unequal, meaning I can't advance my success because those privileges disadvantage me in some way, that's a different story. And unless you're willing to root out those imbalances, those inequities in your organization, they're always going to be there. And in an environment like that, I have to watch out for myself. And if I have to watch out for myself, I'm sure as heck not going to watch out for you.
There's a key concept I play around with, and I call it purpose is your why, something that Simon Sinek said, and then from your why from your purpose comes your vision and your mission, which you can, and frankly, you can achieve in spite of people. But then we get to our values proposition, which is important. And I love the way you equate it, as I do. Values are belonging. Build on that. What do you mean by belonging, Ron?
Well, I think humans are hardwired. Our brains produce a chemical called oxytocin. We are wired to connect. Our brain, to feel our sense of well-being, we need to know we fit in and we matter. Our amygdala, our brain, goes on high alert when we're around new people. We are searching for who can I trust, who's a threat, who's going to agree with my ideas. We're looking for our allies. The minute I get a cue that says, we're glad you're here, we want to know what you think, we appreciate your work, my amygdala goes off threat now, and now my amygdala goes into protecting this relationship. Right now, I'm part of this tribe now, and you're important to me. So our sense of knowing that I can bring all of who I am, be all of who I am in an environment, and that I matter to these people, that I belong to these people, not just belong with them, but I have a sense that they have a vested interest in my success, and I have a vested interest in theirs.
I like it. Belong with and belong to. That's the mutual. That's the reciprocity. Ron, from previous shows, I always ask guests a story of grace, and frankly, this entire book, to be honest, is a book of grace. Is there one thing that you want to call out, and either personally or that you've observed more recently?
I think knowing that you were going to ask the question, I thought about it, and I think in places where people like where we're expected to be the experts all the time, sometimes asking for help isn't our greatest joy. This past weekend, my son was visiting. He works in New York City, and I had to ask him for help on something. We just moved into a new home, and there's lots of rooms to be unpacked and furniture to be assembled, and some tasks I'm good at, and some tasks I'm just not good at. Yeah. And he was so delighted, and I was, I didn't want to. He was up here visiting, and asking your kid for help is weird. And he was delighted to give me help, and he was delighted to give me a hand with something. In fact, he just did it for me.
Yeah, that's good.
He showed me the grace going, I mean, he could have said, you should be able to do this by yourself. And I probably could.
Yeah.
He didn't. I sat there and watched him do the work, and he did it joyfully, and we had a great conversation while doing it. And it was such an experience of grace. I mean, grace is in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yes.
And in the place you most need it. Well, me having to sort of ask for help that I was probably a little bit of shame for having to ask for, and being shown nothing but kindness in return, for me was a beautiful element of grace.
I love that story because I've collected so many of these, and one's children can be a source of grace, as your son demonstrated to you. Ron, how can people find you? And we'll put it in the notes. So.
Yes, absolutely, John. So come visit us at Navalent, NAVALENT.com. We've got videos and some free ebooks. You can come and watch, download our blogs and all kinds of great resources if you're a leader and trying to lead a team. If you wanted to learn more about the book, we have its own website, tobehonest.net, where you can find our TV series, Moments of Truth, where you can see all my conversations with the heroes that I interviewed. We videoed them all, so you can see those and meet a bunch of. I had two co-hosts of that TV show who also did their own interviews with some amazing people in everyday justice and finding your voice. Also, if you want to know about how your team is doing, we have a free assessment called How Honest Is My Team? And you can find that at tobehonest.net/assessment.
Great. Ron, you have been a terrific guest, and thank you. And with that, we're going to close out.
John, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much.